Over the last several years, America has witnessed its fair share of civil unrest, from riots in the streets to protests on college campuses. And at the time of recording this video, many are concerned, and rightfully so, about the upcoming presidential elections here in the United States. Now, the level of frustration here in our country, it's palpable. And I don't think it's hyperbole to say that this election may be one of the most contentious, at least in our lifetimes. And depending on who wins, we will very likely see strong reactions from the other side. And if people take to the streets and voice their opposition to the results leading to violence, which is a very real possibility with the current antagonistic sentiment in our country, what should we be doing now to prepare for this potential outcome? If you're new to this channel, my name is Chris, and on this channel we discuss emergency preparedness, aka prepping. Now, my community has voiced its concerns over the last several months about how people may react this summer or fall leading up to the election. So instead of focusing on what may happen, let's instead look at solutions to protect you and your family if we begin to see civil unrest in our communities. Before we jump into this video, here's a quick announcement. We're opening our city prepping community for new registration beginning June 3rd. We've got a sign up page where you can sign up to join our waiting list, and you'll get a discounted price the day before we open the membership area to the general public. And if you're interested in signing up to join the wait list, I'll post a link in the description and comments section below. So let's jump into the video. It can happen anywhere. It was supposed to be a happy Super Bowl celebration when 12 people brandished firearms and at least 6 people fired weapons. Now, the instant chaos left one person dead, roughly 24 others injured, and sent hundreds of people scrambling for cover. And the person killed was not a part of the fight, but a bullet fired randomly is a random bullet. If it's off its target, it can hit anywhere.
Good evening. We begin tonight with the protests shutting down freeways and bridges across the Bay Area for much of the day today, leading to more than 24 arrests.
Just last month, protesters shut down a major bridge. And there are several college campuses where protests are occurring right now. And we've seen violent protests seize state capitol buildings and disrupt government proceedings in previous years. And of course, we've seen both political parties clash in our nation's capital. We've seen these mass chaos events so frequently in recent years that they are almost a hallmark of our time. And no matter where you live, how close you are to the zones of high concentrations of people, or what side of the political or cultural perspective that you're on, these civil disruptions can impact you directly and indirectly. And sometimes these instances, they spontaneously erupt, and sometimes some warning signs give us some advanced knowledge of their potential. And for example, we all know the presidential election is coming this November, and regardless of who wins, the chances for civil unrest at some level is a very real possibility. I asked in a recent poll, will we see civil unrest during this upcoming presidential election? And over 2/3 of the respondents said, yes, it's almost 100% certainty that something major will happen. So we do have advanced knowledge of the election night and the days after, and we can avoid locations where we can anticipate large crowds of angry people, like capitals and federal buildings. We also know that election night probably is not the best night to go grab dinner at a restaurant or catch a movie. Sometimes we don't have that long advance heads up, but we are able to discern that something is about to happen or could happen. Certain locations where people gather, they tend to flare up more often than other locations. Places like police stations, federal buildings, town squares, and wherever protesters have gathered in the past are far more likely to have an incident than other locations. So, if you do have some short advanced knowledge, you can try to avoid areas that are known as conflict zones. And if the incident is more spontaneous and you have no foreknowledge, you may see crowds running or fleeing an area. If you can assess that they are getting out of an area and not charging into it, you should immediately move in the same direction from wherever they are going away. You can inquire from people what may be happening, but more importantly, you are moving away from the epicenter, even if that means abandoning your vehicle if you're stuck in traffic in the direction everyone is fleeing from. And of course, if you hear gunshots, explosions, or see smoke or fire, immediately move away from that area and don't stop until you're well out of their range. You have 3 zones that you need to be aware of, and those are the incident area, the range of danger around that area, and your home location. And if you're amidst a civil disturbance, you are an unwilling part of it. Your motivation should be either to hunker down or get safely out of range. And if you're proximal to the conflict, you need to be aware of the violence spilling over and impacting you directly. Now, the third zone is your home and your neighborhood and its proximity to the conflict zone. And I'll discuss your home security more later in this video, but for now, understanding what you should be doing and when begins with understanding the focal points of the conflict. Understand the focal points. So where are the focal points? Think of these areas of violent civil discord as being like the focus point of the sunlight that you get from a magnifying glass. The focal point is where the initial fiery flare-up begins. And usually the simmering energy and the collective frustration that boils over into violent outbursts really begins at a location that we'll refer to as a focal point. If the protests are about the Middle East, the focal points will likely be near synagogues, mosques, or colleges. If the conflict is between political parties, the focal point will likely be near government buildings or high visibility, high traffic areas. Some particularly high traffic areas like transit bridges or main roads are sometimes chosen for protests to intentionally disrupt the normal flow of traffic with the intent that this will raise awareness of whatever issue. And that can sometimes lead to a flare-up at that location. If a particular population subset of individuals sharing a common cultural heritage or lineage is involved, the focal point may begin in locations where this group has a high concentration of people. Now, your best way to stay out of the fray and safe is to avoid any focal points that you can identify. Any of the focal points, they can shift locations and they can spread from the center, usually in one direction as a mob. Think of this as a fire spreading and using the most accessible fuel sources. Knowing this, you should avoid main areas of egress from any identified focal point. You also have to be aware that new flare-ups, sometimes miles away, can occur without the rule of law. And when police are focused in a certain area of your town or city, every opportunistic criminal, looter, or anarchist sees this as a free pass to get away with whatever they want. Every story of a riot also has stories of smash and grabs, wide-scale looting, arson, and robberies. And these tend not to spread into mass events of collective anger, but the randomness and chaotic spontaneity can directly impact you. If someone lights a fire at a business or a police station or anywhere near you, that fire can spread. So even if you are far away from that focal point, you should monitor your environment. Get home if you can and implement your security and hunkering down plans. You need to monitor local news broadcasts to determine if any of the focal points are heading in your direction. And you may also consider people heading to known focal points. I don't suggest you get involved, but I do suggest you avoid these chaotic areas. You should also avoid these groups of people heading to that focal point because they are eager to cause chaos. Consider these individuals as sparks that could ignite other fires, and consider them the same as the opportunists that I mentioned earlier. And the final consideration as to focal points is anywhere where there is a crowd. Conflicts, they spread without clear lines. And basically, when one group of people hear about another group of people somewhere else acting like a riot or a mob, they try to start up a conflict where they are. And this makes every area where there is a collective of people a potential flare-up spot. You really need to assess your proximity to these focal points and groups of people the very moment you hear of civil disruption. Then immediately move away from any known focal points. If you're at home, stay there. If you're heading home, try using side streets away from these zones, even if that means taking a circuitous route to get home. It's better to circumnavigate the hotspot than to head toward or through it. And if you're near it or it seems to surround you, try to move into a business that's not likely to be looted, like a restaurant or a coffee shop, and immediately locate the back door of the location. And if the violence spills over to your location, you can exit out the back door and possibly stay safely away from the zone of altercation. Even if you feel it may impact your location, you can use the back door or tell the manager of the business to open up the emergency exit so you can get to safety. If it's right on you and there's no time for that, just use the emergency exit and get to safety. Violence heading your way is an emergency situation. Nobody's going to want to argue that with you, given what's happening in the streets in front of them. And if exiting is not an option, you want to establish yourself near an exit or near an interior wall or even in the bathroom. Having your back to the wall and knowing where your exit are puts you in your best defensive posture. It's best to be in a location where you can safely monitor the situation and look for an opportunity to escape. If that's not possible, the bathroom is often a safe location, maybe if you have a locking door. Not only is the construction solid with water and the ability to go to the bathroom, but mobs are typically not interested in going to the bathroom unless they're pissed, so you can remain unseen until an opportunity to leave the area presents itself. Now, the keys to survival are going to be to remain alert and quiet, keep your head down, and look for an opportunity to move out of the conflict zone to safety. Now, surprisingly, while these areas of conflict can move or spark up anywhere, they're typically not in wide open areas. And if you can move one street over or to the center of a field or park, you may be significantly safer and able to determine a safe route out of your area. And if you're not a target of the violence and merely a bystander, you need to be aware of the conflict and its potential to threaten your safety, but you have a better chance of moving calmly away from the epicenter. Your best spot is home. A lot of the preparations for civil unrest are similar to preps for other natural and man-made disasters. Things like riots, looting, and general civil unrest, they often accompany the disruption of social norms and supply chains. No trucking companies are going to knowingly drive into a city that's on fire. Cargo is susceptible to looting, whether it's televisions or grocery produce. Stores that are under threat of looting or have been looted will not be reopening for business until they can make repairs, they can correct inventory, and feel safe to reopen. Infrastructure maintainers and repair people, they're not going to be willing to go into areas and restore services while angry mobs are tearing things down. And typically these violent periods of civil discord come to an end, they burn themselves out, or are put down through police, military curfews, and martial law. But until they do, it's no different than the hours and days immediately following any natural disaster. This is yet another reason that you need to have 3 weeks of food and water on hand, just as you do for all other emergencies that you prep for. One civil disruption could lead to a complete grid down situation. Here again, a lot depends on location, but when the rule of law breaks down or at least starts to show some cracks, it really makes sense to keep your home secure. Make sure everyone who lives in your home knows your plan and knows how to get home safely. Even with cell phones down, text messages, they may still go through. The last thing that you want to do is move into or through the conflict zone to get to someone in your family and then have to get back home. Your home security plan should consist of locking the doors and windows. Consider a fence, planters, or other natural and constructed barriers that can discourage people from entering your yard or property for any reason. And this could include a gate across a long driveway, perimeter alarms purchase or improvise, and even a dog if you don't already own one. Even though the rule of law may have dissolved into chaos, criminally inclined individuals are going to move to softer targets because the possibility of the law being reestablished is highly likely. Signage that indicates the presence of security cameras, even if they're fake, can dissuade some people. In the presence of motion detection lights, solar floodlights, or exterior lighting, it can also discourage some people. When it comes to signage or outside flags, it's really best not to have anything remotely political or expressing an opinion that could make you a target. You're going to want to keep shades and curtains down, but monitor the outside around your home. Also, monitor whatever news that you can. Local news may not be on the scene right away, but areas with larger populations might have helicopters in the sky so you can get a bird's eye view of the conflict. Regarding firearms, they're always a last resort, but pulling out whatever defensive weapons you use to keep your home safe may be in your best interest. Brandishing any of these may swiftly escalate the violent potential and could potentially put you in a legal situation after the conflict has been resolved. But having access to self-defense weapons increases your personal security. And if possible, it's best to stay out of sight because the unknown person in a strange house is just as intimidating to a would-be criminal. For all they know, there's more than one person behind that window, and maybe they are also heavily armed. If you're not at home, as I said earlier, you're going to want to get home by a route away from the focal point of the conflict, and even if that means that you have to go well around it. If you're on foot, try not to be alone. You should also try to avoid making eye contact with people that you don't know, especially anyone moving towards a conflict. You want to avoid conversations with strangers, keep moving, and pretend not to hear anyone calling after you. I would encourage you to review our video on being the gray man for tips and tricks on how to blend in and move safely. And if you're not at home, but at your office or place of work, you may be safest where you are amongst your colleagues. You may need to spend the night there unless there are very clear signs that the conflict is over. You're never going to want to travel at night if you don't know for sure that peace has been restored. Darkness emboldens violence, crimes, and riots. And if you're at work, you should implement whatever defensive measures that you have. Monitor local news to understand the scope of the violence and have your everyday carry or bug out bag ready in case your area becomes compromised and you're forced to leave. And when it's daylight and safer to move, your priority should be getting home to your preps. You want to consider calling out of work the next day if the potential for more civil discord is likely. Put your safety first. Now, for more information on how to keep riots out of your neighborhood during civil unrest, I would encourage you to consult our video on that subject, which I'll link to here on the side of the screen and in the comments and description section below. In times of civil unrest and uncertainty, your safest spot is always going to be out of the fray. As always, stay safe out there.